The losses among the combatants were heavy, as both sides usually murdered their prisoners, particularly the aristocratic prisoners. If the contemporary reports are accurate, no less than 75,000 men were killed. That is Jasper Ridley writing in his book called The Tudor Age. Today we're going to be looking at that battle, or that war, with key event number 7, the War of the Roses. This was no ordinary one, and it would last for over 30 years, transforming England and ending with Henry VII on the throne. So for this key event, we're going to be looking at describing the events of the War of the Roses and also explaining its significance. So what was the impact that it had on medieval life and then ultimately Tudor life? So for your do now task, I want you to describe the image that has just appeared on screen. What do you think this image could represent? Have you seen it before? And then for your challenge is, well, how do you think this particular image relates to the War of the Roses? Before we begin to look at the context, the events and the significance, it's important we understand a few key words and concepts. So the first phrase that I'll be using throughout this lesson is the House of Lancaster. Now this house was represented by a red rose, which you can now see on screen. This was a branch of the House of Plantagenet, and it provided 3 kings of England: Henry IV, Henry V, and then finally Henry VI. Throughout this lesson as well, you'll probably hear me refer to those people that supported the house or were part of it as Lancastrian or Lancastrians. The second key phrase or concept is the House of York. Now this was represented by a white rose. Again, another house of the Plantagenet, but this time it was a younger branch. And it too provided 3 kings of England: Edward IV, Edward V, and Richard III. And like the Lancastrians we've been referred to with regards to the House of Lancaster, the House of York supporters and members were referred to as Yorkist or Yorkists. And then finally, the 2 key phrases that I'll be using are protector of the realm. In this case, the protector of the realm was essentially the Lord Protector. It was originally used by royal princes or other nobles, and it would be used when the English monarch at the time was either too young or unable to rule. And so they would have someone exercising or ruling in their place until they became fit to rule again or until they became old enough. And then finally, a civil war is a war between 2 organized groups within the same state or country. And I just want to refer back to the do now task regarding the rose that was seen on screen. That was actually called the Tudor rose. And it was a rose that was actually created, as you can see, from the Lancaster rose and the York rose. And actually, in terms of its symbolism, it was very important because it did help bring to end the civil war that was going on in England at the time. Now, the War of the Roses was not a single battle, but was instead a series of wars that were fought between 2 royal houses: the House of Lancaster, represented by a red rose, and the House of York, represented by a white rose. Both of these houses had claims to the throne of England. However, it was the Lancastrians that had occupied the throne, and they did so at the beginning of the 15th century. This was under Henry V and then Henry VI. It was the rule, though, of Henry VI, with its financial and social problems, that would lead to Yorkists attempting to gain the throne. Did you know? So on screen here we have an image of Henry VI. Now, Henry VI was the last king from the House of Lancaster, and he died in the Tower of London. He was actually captured by Edward, who would then go on to become Edward IV. Now, Henry VI, there are 2 competing views around what caused his death. The first one, which was publicised at the time, and is still believed by some to this day, was that he actually died as a result of grief. He had lost his kingdom, he had lost battles, and he had lost his son as well. And some believe that such devastating loss meant that he eventually died just from grief. However, archaeological studies of his actual skull suggest that he suffered a very violent end. And as a result, people believe that he was actually murdered in the tower under the orders of Edward IV. What was it about Henry VI's rule that led to the War of the Roses? Well, he is said to have been an intelligent man, but one that lacked leadership. This was made worse by several mental breakdowns, with one in particular happening in 1453. It was during this breakdown that Richard, 3rd Duke of York, rallied by his supporters, was installed as protector of the realm. Upon Henry VI's recovery in 1455, he set about trying to reclaim his authority over the country. This forced Richard to take up arms for self-protection, ending with the first battle of the wars at St. Albans on May the 22nd, 1455. The Yorkists were victorious, resulting in a truce between the two houses. However, this truce would last for just 4 years, when another series of civil wars began. The truce would be short-lived, and this time it would be the Lancastrians who would end in a position of power. In 1459, Richard was forced to flee to Ireland. However, this, like the truce, would be short-lived. Yorkist forces regrouped in France in 1460, and they prepared for yet another attempt to gain the throne. However, Richard, 3rd Duke of York, would be killed in December of the same year, now giving the Lancastrians the upper hand. This too would be short-lived, as Richard's son fought on and gained a rousing victory over the Lancastrians and Henry VI. Then he went on to be crowned King of England as Edward IV. Over the next 20 years, squabbles and disputes continued with the throne. The throne would then change hands several times. The decisive battle that saw an end to the wars took place in 1485 on the 22nd of August. This became known as the Battle of Bosworth. It was fought between Henry Tudor, a Lancastrian, and Richard III, a Yorkist. It would end with the defeat of Richard III and also his death. He was the last King of England to be killed in battle. With Henry Tudor's victory, he was crowned King of England and became Henry VII. He would rule from 1485 to his death in 1509. An inspired leader, he was able to unite the two warring houses. This was done through his marriage to Elizabeth of York in 1486. Not only were the two houses united through marriage, but then through the adoption of the Tudor Rose, containing the badges of both Lancastrians and Yorkists. Henry VII was able to unite the houses and bring the War of the Roses to an end. Did you know? So on the 24th of August 2012, the University of Leicester, Leicester City Council and Richard III Society announced that they had joined forces together to begin looking for his remains. So on the 5th of September 2012, excavators announced that they had identified a location where they believed his remains could be found. This was where a memorial to Richard III had stood in the early 17th century. It was now a car park. On the 12th of September, it was then announced that a skeleton had been discovered during this search, and that it could be Richard III. Months passed, and on February the 4th, 2013, the University of Leicester confirmed that this skeleton was beyond reasonable doubt to be that of King Richard III. His remains were then carried in a procession to Leicester Cathedral on the 22nd of March 2015. He would then be reburied 4 days later, and in the image in the background you can see that burial. So what is the significance of the War of the Roses? Well, its immediate impact can be found in the number of lives that were lost during this series of wars. As mentioned right at the beginning of this lesson, it is estimated that a total of 75,000 people lost their lives during these wars. This is staggering for the time. In fact, that would equate to around 3% of the population. Now, traditionalist views suggest that this amount of deaths actually continued the changes within the feudal system that had started following the Black Death. And Henry VII would go on to have much tighter control over his barons and nobles in an attempt to reduce their influence and also to prevent another civil war like this from happening again. Its longer-lasting significance lies in the birth then of a new royal dynasty, a dynasty that was started by Henry VII, and a dynasty that would create its own turning points in English history, from the English Reformation to the early beginnings of a British Empire. This was a Tudor dynasty then that would shape England and Britain for hundreds of years to come. Yet again, it's time for our quick quiz. So, make sure that you've got the questions written down or that you have downloaded the sheet that accompanies this video. In addition to that, I would suggest probably watching up until this point once more. I think these questions are quite difficult this time. So take your time answering them. And remember, it is about giving it your best shot. So press pause and have a go at answering these 10 questions. Press pause now. So it's now time to mark your answers. So using a different coloured pen if possible, give yourself a mark out of 10. Once you've done that, you'll be then ready to move on to the main task. So press pause now. Now time for our main task. So using this video, I would like you to create a timeline of the key events of the War of the Roses. I recognise that the key events at times can be quite confusing for this period. So a really effective way of organising those in your mind is actually to create a timeline. So I want you to use the dates that are shown on the right to help guide you. And then I've also included a link in the top right screen that might also be of further assistance. As always, you can restart the video and watch it, and then you can make notes about what happened during each of those key events. Once you've finished creating your timeline, then we're going to have a look at the challenge task. But I think this will take you around 25 to 30 minutes to do. So press pause now. So we come now to our final task, the challenge task. And this task focuses on the princes in the tower, an event often seen as a history mystery. It concerns the disappearance of two princes, Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury. I want you to go away and to find out a little bit more about what happened to these two young men. Use the links shown on screen then to write a short story explaining their disappearance. Below you can also see a series of sentence starters that should help you structure your story, as well as some guidance as to what to include in each part. So that brings us to the end of key event number 7, the Wars of the Roses. Thank you for taking part in today's lesson, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.